Channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev, because very interesting details and updates are coming from this area. According to information we have, yesterday the US Senator Lindsey Graham came to Kiev with official visit, and while on a visit to Kiev, he called the upcoming meeting between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul on the June 2nd a charade. Also, he added that Ukraine is not losing this war. That is Russian propaganda. Look at the map a year ago and look at it today. It is virtually the same. Furthermore, Lindsey Graham stated that he has prepared the bill. That bill has been already supported by 82 senators of the United States of America. And according to this bill, everybody who has trade relations with Russia will suffer huge tariffs, around 500%. Obviously, this is going to be a very powerful strike against Russia and its allies. Furthermore, during the first 24 hours, we got additional statements from the President of the United States of America. Trump on Putin. I know him very well. We have been through a lot together. I was very surprised when they started launching missiles at cities like Kiev, just when I thought we were close to reaching an agreement and resolving the conflict. I am very disappointed. This is the statements of the President of the United States of America. But from the other side, Washington continues its policy of de-escalation, de-sanctioning Russia. On May 20th, an official document was published on the website of the US Department of Justice. It is about the launch of the procedure for excluding Rostech CEO Sergei Chemezov from the sanctioned list. So we see that from one side, the United States of America are tightening the news around Russia and its trade relations with other countries, but from the other side, we see that the United States of America doesn't want to ruin relations with Russia. At the same time, with Russia, we see prepares for a very long war with Ukraine. According to information we have, and according to Ukrainian sources citing satellite images, report that since the end of March, construction of additional parking spaces for aircraft has begun at the Engels 2nd Air Base in the Saratov region. I'll remind you that the Russians are using this airfield for strategical aviation like Tu-95 or Tu-160 with the purpose to attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine with cruise missiles of type Ha-101. So we see that the Russians are trying to improve their positions with the purpose to use these missiles and to use these aircrafts in the future. Furthermore, we continue receiving different reports about the relations between Russia and North Korea, and according to information we have, since the beginning of the 2024, North Korea sent the Russian Federation more than 9 million rounds of different calibers. Now let's move to the ground and let's discuss the situation first along the line of combat contact in the Sumy direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. First of all, according to different sources, there are still very heavy clashes for the village of Kondratovka. The sources reported that Ukrainians suffer losses and that the Russians are not reducing their pressure. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to clear up to 50% of the village of Alexeyevka, and most likely today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will announce the end of the battle for the settlement of Vodolahye. Several pro-Russian very reliable resources adjusted their maps in the area of Yunakivka. Today, very reliable pro-Russian resources colored already up to 50% of the settlement, which means that the battle for this village is coming to an end, and probably during the next 5 days the Russians either will publish the video with the Russian flag or the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. So we see that there are very heavy clashes and the Russians are getting closer and closer to the main defense belt in the city of Sumy, in the Sumy region. We are talking about huge forest that is located between the city of Sumy itself and the Russian border. So there are lots of Ukraine positions, and telling the truth, I'm not even sure how exactly the Russians are going to walk through this forest in upcoming months.
Jeg hedder Trine Terkelsen, og jeg synes, at du skal gå ind og høre playlisten Godnatsange. Der har jeg nogle af mine fortolkninger.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv area. Another day in a row, the Russians are bombing and attacking the city of Chigov with Iskander missiles. Probably since the 20th of May of 2025, the Russians have already launched dozens of strikes in this area. This is the main logistic hub that Ukrainians use to supply and support their forces in the northeastern part of Kharkiv region. We're talking about the city of Volchansk, we're talking about the territory along the border, and we're talking about the situation in the city of Kupiansk itself. So let's discuss every single direction step by step. And first, let's talk about the most northeastern part of the settlement. Today, according to several mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions by shortening the distances, by maintaining the lines between the villages of Topoli and Stroivka. So as you can see, as a result of forces, as a result of offensive operation, several forest belts in this area were taken by the Russians, and the Russians continue their offensive. Now we see that now the Russians are going to attack these three forests that are located right in front of them. So this is the next defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine, and if the Russians are able to take these territories under complete control, then the Russians will be able to enter operational space and to continue advancing further in the western direction without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side until the village of Dvorechinskaya. Furthermore, today pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that indeed the Russians began offensive operation in this area, and the Ukrainian sources colored the territory around the village of Stroivka as a contested area or the gray zone. So as you can see, the Ukrainians continue refusing to accept the reality that the village of Stroivka was taken by the Russians completely. I'll remind you that this information about complete control of the village of Stroivka we got the day before yesterday. The pro-Russian resources published a video where we can see how Russians were attacking this territory, how the Russians were storming this area, and how the Russians raised their flags in the most final part of the video. So exactly in this video moment we can see a Russian soldier that raised Russian flag. But once again, according to information we have, the Ukrainian sources refuses to accept this reality. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the city of Kupiansk itself. I'll remind you that yesterday, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kondrashevka. Later, we got several reports that the Russians managed to answer the city of Kupiansk itself from the north, and according to several mappers, these facilities were taken by the Russians. But this morning, we got additional clarifications, and the Russians moved not in the southern direction towards these facilities, but the Russians established complete control over these gas facilities. So this is a completely different situation, as you can see. Anyway, according to several sources, by the morning of the 31st of May of 2025, the Russians secured this area, and the Russians are about to begin, and the Russians are ready to continue offensive operation in the direction of the village by the name of Golubovka, which is located along the river Voskol. So we expect that during the next 24 hours, the main clashes are going to take place exactly in this area, and most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back in the direction of the city of Kupiansk itself. When talking about the city itself, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the territory of the region with the FAPs, with artillery, and with missiles. The city of Kupiansk is under very heavy fire. Furthermore, we got reports that Ukrainians announced additional evacuation. Furthermore, as we can see, the Russians intensified their aviation activities in the pockets to the east of the river Voskol, so basically on the Russian side of the river. So we expect that in this area the Russians are going to resume their attempts to attack with the purpose to cut this pocket completely. So the battle for the city of Kupiansk hasn't entered the final stage, but approached to the stage as close as possible. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the most important area. We are going to talk about the Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional updates from the city of Chasiv, and according to several very reliable pro-Russian resources, the Russians by the morning of the 31st of May of 2025 established control for over more than 80% of the city of Chasiv. Additional positions of the armed forces of Ukraine were taken in the Shevchenko micro district. So when summarizing everything that we got during the previous 2 nights of between the 30th and the 31st of May of 2025, the Russians managed to establish complete control over everything to the east of these, let's say, red lines. So this is about the Russians are about to finish the battle, another legendary battle for the city of Chasiv on their way to the city of Konstantinovka. There are just several micro districts left in front of the Russians, and most likely they will be able to move through them very fast. We are talking about the micro district of Yuzhny, micro district of Zemlyanki, half of the micro district of Shevchenko, and probably half of the micro district of Cech number 2. So the Russians, to finish the battle, need to finish with territories that are located to the east of this white line, and then this is going to be the end of the battle for the city of Chasiv Yar, and this is going to be probably the beginning of Russian offensive operation in the direction of the northeastern and the eastern part of the city of Konstantinovka. Now let's talk about the area between the city of Toretsk and Konstantinovka. Today several mappers confirmed Russian progress on the ground in the area of the northern Yunakivka. According to information we have, there are very heavy clashes on this line. The Russians are trying to establish complete control over this stronghold. The Ukrainians are counter-attacking from the northern Yunakivka with the purpose to stabilize the situation. This is very important stronghold. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, then Ukrainians most likely would be forced to begin their fallback operation from the area of the Yunakivka in the northern directions towards the village of Bilagora. As for the Kliban-Byksky pocket, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions along the line of combat contact, and several additional true lines and fortifications were taken by the Russians. This is the situation by the end of the 30th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 31st of May. The Russians are about to finish the battle for the northeastern and the northern part of the city of the village of Zarya, and most likely the Russians will finish the battle for this territory in upcoming days. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation on the western flank of the Kliban-Byksky pocket, trying to get as close as possible to the village of Yablunovka from the south. Additional tree lines and fortifications in the fields were taken by the Russians during the previous night. So this is the situation by the end of the 30th of May, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 31st of May of 2025.
Hej, er du virksomhedsejer? Så se med her de næste 20 sekunder. Vi ved, at det kan være
The Russians continue offensive operation in the pocket between villages Yelizavetovka, Malinovka and Miralyubovka. According to information we have, the Russians had significant advances from the village of Yelizavetovka in the northwestern direction. And by the morning of the 31st of May of 2025, everything below this red line was taken by the Russians, according to several pro-Russian resources. We see that Ukrainians has less and less territories under their feet, and most likely in the very near future, those who manage to survive would be forced to fall back in the western directions towards the village of Mykolaievka through these probably tree lines, and most likely this is going to happen in the very near future. As for the beginning of the 31st of May, the Ukrainians control this biggest stronghold in this area, the base defense of armored forces of Ukraine in this direction, but if Ukrainians lose this stronghold, they will lose the entire pocket. Now let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. Today we got additional very interesting information, and the most important is that the Russians answered the village of Alexeyevka from the east. At least the Russians managed to improve their positions, and currently the Russians, according to several sources, according to the 46th Air Mobile Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Russians control up to 2 streets in the most eastern part of the village. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians, while the Russians were trying to attack the village of Alexeyevka from the east. One of the episodes, as you can see according to this video, took place exactly in the most eastern part of the settlement. So based on this geolocation we can make a conclusion that the Russians control already 2 streets of the village of Alexeyevka, and the Russians continue advancing in the western direction. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians are trying to advance in the direction of this line from the south, from the villages of Bogatyr and from the village of Odradne. So we expect additional geolocations on the line of these 2 roads of attack. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation from the north and from the east, trying to shorten the corridor for Ukrainians for evacuation. So this battle is also ongoing and most likely will not take too long. The Russians continue advancing in the direction of Kamar from the south. Today, several sources confirmed that the village of Vysyola was taken by the Russians yesterday. And I'll remind you that yesterday the Russians published this video where we can see how another Russian soldier raised the Russian flag in the most northern part of the settlement of Vysyola, which is 100% proof that the Russians secured this territory completely and continue advancing further in the northern direction. As for the southern directions like Zaporozhye, Orekhov or Gulyai Polye, during the previous 12 hours we haven't received anything special.